Minister, it's becoming very clear both from the science in recent months that ventilation is one of the key issues in tackling COVID-19, but I suppose it's also, this is the time of year, it's the Irish winter, the cold is becoming very significant. Now, for some modern schools and school buildings, it's not so much of an issue as for schools with older buildings, and principals are having to make difficult choices with limited, or in some instances no, guidance as to how to manage that. And that's putting pressure on heating bills. It's also leading to tough decisions around how to communicate to parents the guidance to give in terms of their children.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Practical steps for the deployment of good ventilation practices were provided to the school system in August in the context of reopening for September 2020. And indeed, Deputy, contrary to what you say, this guidance has recently been reviewed and was circulated to education partners, and the updated guidance has also now been published. In terms of good ventilation practices in schools, it's important, particularly as we get further into winter, as you have said, that we achieve an appropriate balance between good ventilation and comfort. The overall approach for schools should be to have windows open as fully as possible when classrooms are not in use, for example during break times, lunch times and at the end of the school day, and partially open when classrooms are in use to achieve appropriate airflow. It is worth noting that windows do not need to be open as wide in windy, colder weather in order to achieve the same level of airflow into the classroom. This will assist in managing comfort levels in classrooms during periods of colder weather, including those in prefabricated accommodation. As part of managing comfort levels in classrooms, schools should check that their heating systems are set at the recommended manufacturer's guidance levels to maximise the available heat to the school. In addition, heating should operate for extended periods during colder weather to counteract as best as possible the impact of windows being open in order to maintain an appropriate balance between ventilation and comfort levels. My department has reviewed the HPSC guidance that consideration be given to installing an indoor air quality monitor in classrooms. The purpose of a monitor in this context is to assist in determining when windows should actually be opened. It should be noted that an air monitor would not increase the air temperature in the classroom. As reflected in the updated guidance, the Department has concluded that windows are likely to be required to be open at a frequency outlined earlier to ensure appropriate levels of ventilation in the classroom, irrespective of whether the opening of windows is prompted through an indoor air quality monitor, which is a reactive approach, or through the proactive approach outlined in the guidance. While this matter and supporting data, of course, will be kept under review, the Department does not consider it necessary for schools to install such monitors in classrooms where the practical steps outlined in the updated guidance are applied. However, it is a matter for individual schools to consider whether or not they wish to put in mechanisms of this nature.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Leary.
Minister, that's an interesting reply. There's a lot in that to consider. First, I just want to make the point, and I'm sure you're very aware of it, because it's certainly a point that principals raised with me. I'm aware of the updated guidance, but it's still the case that it does involve windows being open, albeit that there is, there's times that can be done, the extent to which, but it still means in the older buildings, look, you can think of them yourself, school buildings and Christian Brothers schools built in the 50s and 60s, they just weren't designed for these situations, even if they were renovated. And children who's sitting next to the window and coats and hot water bottles and everything, it's a real dilemma for principals, even in the context of current times. I actually think that the issue of air monitoring is essential. It will assist in keeping budgets down if it ensures that you strike the right balance in terms of windows being open and heating and everything else, and will also ensure that windows are not open unnecessarily, that you get that balance right. It's the information that's there. It sounds to me, Minister, that you're not ruling that out, and I welcome that. But can you state that? What I would say about that is, why I welcome, if I'm correct, that you're not ruling it out. I suppose the pity of that is that the ideal opportunity to do this is over the Christmas break, when schools are closed in any event. So if this is something the Department is going to be doing, the ideal avenue, the ideal space to do it is coming up.
Minister.
I do appreciate the point that you make, and I think in the interest of balance and giving it its proper context, I should have to say at the outset that no building really has been built for a COVID-19 environment. It's not unique to what's happening in the school environment, it's what's happening really in every building that we would be aware of. The specific instance that you raise in terms of air monitors, again, I would have to emphasise to you that they will not increase the air temperature in a room. They'll merely monitor in terms of when you should open a window, perhaps when you should close the window or whatever. And significant guidance, practical guidance, has been given to schools in terms of measures of that nature, open before class commenced, during break times, lunch times, evening times or whatever. And it is reliant, I appreciate, on an abundance of practical common sense and practicality, but there is, in my experience, an abundance of that in the schools as it exists. Indeed, I will say to you, schools do have the freedom in terms of the minor works grant, but also I have said to you that I will keep everything under review. I would do that on a constant basis in relation to anything in terms of education. Thank you.
Deputy.
Said, Minister, that it doesn't increase the temperature, it only tells you when the windows need to be opened. By extension, it tells you also when the windows don't need to be open, which I think would be very useful to very many schools that are trying to manage the situation in terms of ensuring the welfare of the children in their care, both from COVID and indeed from other types of illnesses. So, Minister, I am taking that you're not ruling it out, but I would ask you to go back to the HPSC, continue to examine this. I think it would be of value, and that perfect avenue, or that perfect opportunity, is there over the Christmas break for people to go into the schools and to do it. Final point to you, Minister, and I raised it with you previously. It seems to me inevitable that there will be additional money required for the ordinary school budget, the capitation, early in the new year, because heating costs are going up, refuse costs are going up with PPE and wipes and sanitizer and all the rest of it, and fundraising has inevitably fallen through the roof, including room hire. So, Minister, will additional funding be provided to schools in terms of capitation early within this school year, and when will it?
Right. Minister.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Just to go back to the air monitors and that, again, as I say, I'm very confident of the practicality that exists in every classroom, and I'm very confident of how it's been operated by the school community in terms of ventilation. And I again make the point to you that this is an issue that has been dealt with by many bodies, and many buildings have to cope with similar situations at present. In relation to questions of heating and capitation and all of that, as you would be aware, Deputy, the capitation increased by 2.5% in the budget for 2020-2021, and that's on top of a 5% increase in the previous year, bringing it to but I'm making you aware of the increase in capitation. I will say to you, Deputy, that it is an increase that I am intent, if at all possible, to continue that trajectory going forward. I think that's important. But equally so, I would point out to you that substantial funding has gone into the school to meet measures of a COVID-19 nature, and I think that has helped schools considerably in doing what needs to be done.
Question 26 is with Deputy Matt Shanahan.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, I'd like to ask you, please, if the administration day that is currently being allowed to teaching principals will be maintained into 2021, and I suppose ideally beyond that. There's a very significant workload facing all school principals now, and I think COVID has only just highlighted how difficult that is, and there's a huge body of administration to be done. So just if you have some thoughts on that, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. I do wish to acknowledge the huge contribution, Deputy, made by all school leaders, particularly during this COVID-19 academic year, as they continue to work to ensure that schools can operate safely. The roadmap for the full return to school provides for comprehensive supports across a range of areas to allow for the safe and sustainable operation of schools. This package of supports provided totals something in the region of £557 million for the 2020-21 school year. And this includes funding for additional staffing, management supports, enhanced cleaning, hand hygiene, personal protective equipment costs and increased capital works funding for schools under the COVID-19 response plans. As part of this additional funding, specific funding, as you have pointed out, was provided to support principals and deputy principals who undertake teaching duties in primary schools. This funding provides each teaching principal with a minimum of 1 release day per week, and release days for deputy principals in those schools that have an existing administrative principal for this school year. More than 1,700 primary schools with teaching principals have benefited from the increase in release days. These supports will remain in place for the remainder of this school year, the academic year 2020-2021, and the continuation of these supports will be considered as part of the ongoing measures required to support schools to operate in a COVID-19 context and to implement the control measure required to limit the spread of COVID-19 in our schools, in line with public health advice and the annual estimates provided for the next academic year.
Deputy Shanahan.
Thank you, Minister. As Minister, as you know, there's been a massive body of work, as you point out, being done by school principals, deputy principals and boards of governance. But I know you're expert in the area of education, but if you take any school with 200 or 300 pupils, you can just see the workload that has come because of COVID in terms of procurement. The other thing I'd highlight to you is the difficulty that's been in the sector in terms of recruiting people from assistant principal to take on the principal's workload, and it is being seen by a lot of assistant principals as an onerous task, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at in terms of the administration of the role and how it's done. And I think, again, and just one other thing, whether the department should be looking at doing some kind of ongoing training, be it procurement training or business consulting for principals. I think it's very unfair for some people to be elevated into a position where basically maybe they didn't want to take it, they felt responsible to take it, and they suddenly find themselves in the middle of all these other governance issues which they're probably not have not been exposed to before, and I think that's something that should be looked at going forward.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I do appreciate, as I did outline and indeed as you reiterated, the huge workload really that has been placed on the shoulders of school leaders and indeed school communities. And I do recognise the importance of these additional days and how beneficial they have been. And indeed, I think we have seen now that they have been given the excellent use that they have been put to and the very necessary provision that they were. And I think that showed considerable foresight, I think, from the department in putting them in place in the first place. And I in no way underestimate the benefit of them, the value of them. And at this point, in terms of next year, as I say, we will review going forward the COVID-19 measures that are required for next year in the context of the budget as well. But I'm very, very conscious of the benefit of that measure. In terms of support for principals, there are a suite of measures in terms of supports for principals and recognising not just principals but deputy principals and the leadership role that they play within the schools. I don't for 1 minute underestimate their value and their importance in the school. Thank you, Deputy.
Shanahan.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. And as I say, I think one of the things that needs to be looked at is, regardless of the ongoing days and admin supports, I think just some continuous education or training, for want of a better phrase, in terms of maybe governance, and would be a great help to teachers, and some visibility into 2022, hopefully, that these days would be secured for the very onerous burden that the principals have to put up with. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister, to conclude.
Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate the points that you make, and in terms of, in the context of COVID-19 as well, just that you would be aware that we've had a series of webinars in terms of the specific demands that are being placed on principals and school leaders in the context of COVID-19. Those webinars were also available for school community in terms of parents and children returning to school and all of that, and in the context of COVID-19 we will continue in that manner as well. Thank you.
Okay, Minister, it is a very positive thing that additional ASD units are being opened in schools across the state. We need very many more. There's no doubt about that, and the demand for units is constantly growing. However, the question I have before us is to focus on the fact that those units fill a very important role, but they're not suitable for everyone. And I am concerned that we're not building enough special schools, and indeed that perhaps there is some resistance to that, not from you, Minister, but from others. So, Minister,
thank you, Deputy. Minister,
I want to hear your plans in relation to that.
Yes, Minister. Mr. Madigan.
That children with special education needs should receive their education in placements which are appropriate to their needs alongside their peers wherever possible, unless such an approach would be inconsistent with the best interests of the individual child or other children in the school. And this approach is consistent with the provisions of the Education for Persons with Special Education Needs Act 2004. And my department's policy is therefore to provide for the inclusive education of children with special education needs in mainstream schools. And the majority of children with special needs attend mainstream education with additional supports. And this policy is supported by significant investment by government, 2 billion, Deputy, as you're aware, or 20% of the total education spend, and this funds the provision of additional teachers, special needs assistants and other supports required to enable children with special needs to access education. And only where it has been assessed that the child is unable to be supported in mainstream education or special class placements or special school placements or ASD units, as you referred to, recommended and provided for. And it's therefore not the case that special educational placements are required to support all children with special education needs, nor is it intended that this should be the case. But my department will continue to provide for a continuum of provision, which includes ASD units, special class and special school places for children who have been assessed as needing such placements. And the department's school building programme is focused on providing the additional school places to ensure that every child, including children with special needs, has a school place. And this includes opening new schools and extending existing schools in areas where more school places are needed to meet the growing number of children living in the area. And funding, I should say, Deputy, is also available to schools to establish special classes within existing accommodation, and schools can apply for capital funding to reconfigure existing spaces in their buildings to accommodate the class or to construct, indeed, additional accommodation.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy.
Minister, I agree with every word of that. The key bit, though, Minister, that we need to drill into is the bit that says where it is assessed that it is not possible or not suitable for a child to be educated in such a unit, and that they have a greater or they have a different need, and that, generally speaking, relates to special schools. There is a concern out there among people who are involved in special schools, and indeed involved in units, that there is a resistance to the opening of additional special schools. Now, my experience from a number of areas, but I'll speak particularly about my own constituency in Cork, is that there is a need for probably at least 2 additional special schools in Cork City, and perhaps another one in the county. There's people involved in existing special schools that have waiting lists of 5 years. And of course this has a knock-on effect. If a child who needs a place in a special school, which would be the optimum place for them, cannot obtain that and they're in a unit, then that place in a unit is potentially denied to a student who does not have any special educational places. It also leads to an inflation in those who, like last year... Look, Minister. Can you confirm, Minister, do you agree that there is a need to build additional special schools?
Minister.
What I will say to you, Deputy, is it is the policy of the Department and the NCSC to explore and to find out and discover how many special needs places are needed, whether that's special classes, whether it's special schools, whether it's the child with special needs being integrated within a mainstream class. And I know you mentioned Cork. I know St Mary's special school in Oireachtas accommodated an extra 6 or 7 children this year. There are 311 SEN classes in total in Cork, and in relation to ASD classes specifically, including early intervention, there are about 260. And the Department has, you may be aware, Deputy, been in discussions with the NCSC and school management and the Cope Foundation through Scoil Ashlin in terms of a possible expansion in relation to a special school, in relation to places there. But obviously the Department always looks at short-term options, so they'll be exploring the city centre in Cork to see whether there is availability there. There are medium-term options as well, so looking at greenfield sites to see whether there's any modular buildings, and also looking at long-term options as well.
Dáil Éireann.
Yeah, Minister, no, look, I mean, I suppose a lot of that I'm aware of, and I suppose there is some positive things happening in the sphere of special education in Cork, albeit it's coming from one of the lowest bases. It is in a very, very challenging space, even compared to other parts of the country. And some of the issues that need to be resolved, you talk about greenfield sites, there's some special schools and buildings that are just not fit for purpose, and even to accommodate the children that are in them now, they need a greenfield site. But what I'm trying to establish, look, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of talk about the New Brunswick model, and that talks about the full integration of all children into the mainstream education system. Now, look, I mean, whatever about in the abstract, to be honest, in the context of the education system we have, and the school building system that we have, and the resources that we have, I believe we are a very long way from being able to even consider a model like that, or well, not consider it, but I don't believe we're in a position to deliver that at this point in time. What I think we do need to do is we need to look at the needs that are there at this point in time. That does include additional units, certainly, at primary and post-primary, but it has to include special schools. So, Minister, are you open to the idea, whatever about specific areas, in the abstract, do you agree that there is scope for additional special schools and that they may be needed?
I would say to you, at this point, deputies, we neither rule anything in or out. The NCSE is due to come back to me with their conclusive policy advice in relation to an inclusion model within the Irish system. But I like to talk about the Irish model as distinct from any other model, and you may be aware that in this budget we secured funding in relation to the expansion of the school inclusion model, which we will be expanding into 2 extra new community health organisation areas, and that will start from September 2021. And this is a multidisciplinary approach which will revolutionise the experience for a child with special needs in this country. There will be speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, behaviour and crisis practitioners. So all of that is already in process, and it's important to bear in mind as well, there are obviously different criteria that special classes and special schools have, and indeed mainstream, in terms of the child's needs, and it's always about the best interests of the child.
Thank you, Minister. We go next to Deputy Richard O'Donoghue on question number 28.
As per government guidelines, students must not present themselves to schools if they have travelled internationally. Several reports have indicated a small minority of parents are disregarding the guidelines set out by the government in these instances. What provisions are in place by the Department of Education to police these occurrences? Can you clarify if the students can be refused entry to the schools, if Garda can be contacted to verify if the students in question have been overseas, and take necessary action with the child's parents?
Minister.
From Monday the 9th of November, Ireland has implemented the EU coordinated traffic light approach for those travelling into Ireland. In general, this requires those returning to or entering Ireland from orange or red list countries to restrict their movements for 14 days. And this includes school staff, parents and students coming from abroad to attend school in Ireland. Restricting your movements means staying indoors in one location and avoiding contact with other people and social situations as much as possible. Schools have a duty of care of its students and staff members. If a school has reasonable grounds for believing that its duty of care towards its staff and students is being undermined, schools can refuse access to the student or staff member concerned during this period. The whole school community is working together to create a positive and safe environment for teaching and learning in the particular and oftentimes challenging context of COVID-19. Ensuring that all students and their parents are made aware of the public health requirements as they relate to schools in a COVID-19 context is also very important. The Department, working with the education partners, has developed a range of information and resources for parents and students to reinforce the importance of the safety control measures in place in school to minimise the risk of spread of infection observed by all students and school community. Contacting An Garda Síochána to establish the travel arrangements of students and staff is not considered appropriate, Deputy.
O'Donoghue.
Minister, can you tell me who is responsible? Is it the principal, the teacher, the board of management, the chairperson? Does a teacher have to make these decisions? Which of these persons is it, Minister? These children ideally should be at school and they are allowed to roam the streets without supervision during the day, which is something that nobody wishes. My understanding is that a person must fill a form called a COVID-19 passenger form before they enter the country. In this case, where more than 50 passengers on board a flight returning from a wedding in Spain and returning by the ferry from the UK. How were these regulations placed, since many of these families were attending schools? In such cases, are the schools informed of the practice, and how is the regulation managed? Minister, I need answers to these questions. I need to know who makes the decisions, and I would like to know, is it the chairperson, is it the principal, who is it? So we can give direct guidelines to schools to let them know who makes that decision.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy, I can't speak specifically to the case that you would raise there because I wouldn't be familiar with that case. But in general, I would say to you, as I have outlined here, the school does have a duty of care to its students and to its staff body. And if within that duty of care there is a view that that duty of care is being impeded by the return of somebody who has travelled abroad and is not observing the 14-day restriction or whatever restriction is necessary at that time, the school can act. They have every right to refuse access to anyone who hasn't fulfilled their obligation to maintain their restricted movement requirement. And that operates and has operated and has indeed operated well throughout the schools. There are 4,000 schools, 100,000 staff and 1 million students, and that is not an issue that has been raised on an ongoing basis with the department, because in this context, as indeed in all contexts, the schools are using sufficient practicality and wisdom and know-how as to what to do in that instance. But equally so, I'd like to say that parents have exercised very good judgment, and parents have been highly responsible in how they have operated within the COVID-19 guidelines, whether it's within travel measures or whatever the case might be.
Deputy O'Donoghue.
Thanks, Minister. As again I go back to this is a minority. I must acknowledge that we are talking here about a minority that are holding communities and their businesses to ransom. The resilience shown by the communities and the businesses must be commended, and I encourage the people of these towns and the surrounding areas to support the businesses who have shown courageous strength to keep their doors open while working at a loss. The continued work is ongoing in our communities by Garda Síochána with these minorities, and a special mention goes out to newly appointed Superintendent Elaine Magner and her team. But Minister, we are seeing here that there is and we've spoken about parents and children that have all the restrictions, they have abided by the guidelines. What I am talking about here is a minority of people that have no regard for their lives or the people around them. And it's how they're policed and how they're affecting the communities around them when they're not policed.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, and I appreciate the sincerity with which you raised the point. And again, I will reiterate to you very genuinely that the school, if the school has any suspicion or believes that its duty of care has been impeded by the actions of anyone within the school community, they have an absolute right to refuse access to the school. And I have every confidence that, that those measures would be implemented appropriately by schools.
Minister,
keeping the virus out of schools and keeping open schools safely, which is, as you know, something that Sinn Féin supports, necessarily means dealing with COVID cases swiftly within the school as soon as they arrive. And I think it's good that there are school-specific contact teams. We need more clarity, though, on the criteria these teams will be working off. A lot of school staff and students have been in touch. They're concerned that they weren't deemed close contacts, even though it seemed self-evident that they were. They need peace of mind. So, Minister, what is the criteria for deeming a close contact? Will you ensure that this is published, and has it or is it being revised as part of the rollout of school tracing teams?
Thank you, Deputy. The management of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in schools is, as you are aware, led by Public Health. The Department does not have a role in providing guidance of a clinical or medical nature. The contact tracing teams are led by public health professionals. The HSE Health Protection Surveillance Centre have published the following definition of a close contact in an educational setting, which was communicated to all schools and the partners in education. And this is their communication. In accordance with current Health Protection Surveillance Centre close contact guidelines, a clinical public health risk assessment will be undertaken for all educational settings where a confirmed case is attended whilst infectious. A public health risk assessment determines close contacts as any person who has had face-to-face contact within less than 1 metre with a confirmed case of COVID-19 for more than 15 minutes in a school day, or any person who has between 1 and 2 metres from a confirmed, who has been in contact between 1 and 2 metres from a confirmed case of COVID-19 for more than 15 minutes in a school day, with consideration of other mitigating measures, including face coverings, pods, ventilation, infection prevention control measures, or uncertain compliance with mitigating measures in place. Contacts are assessed from contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19 during their infectious period, 48 hours before the onset of symptoms if symptomatic, or 24 hours before the test for COVID-19 was taken in those who are asymptomatic. This definition is based on international public health guidance. It is the view of public health that the evidence available to date shows that schools are proving to be safe spaces for children and for its staff. The Department of Public Health have also facilitated webinars for school leaders in relation to this and other public health messages. Furthermore, dedicated school teams have been enhanced to provide specific, detailed and dedicated supports to schools where there is a confirmed case of COVID-19. The Department will continue to work closely with all of the education partners and the public health system so that schools can continue to be supported during this very challenging time. Thank you, Deputy.
Deputy.
Minister, first, I'm glad to see you engaged with this. Other ministers would have taken an attitude that it's nothing to do with me, but I'd like to see you engage with it more. You are, I suppose, very aware, obviously, that one of the key trade unions in the sector have made this a point on which they are currently engaging with your department and indeed the HSE in relation to potential industrial action, which is a very serious thing that we all want to avoid, I'm sure. But the issue of criteria is one of the key points. So, Minister, if we're accepting that that is static, is not being reconsidered, and I think that potentially creates a problem. There's also some contradictions, I suppose, or at least I think difficulties that have been created on the ground. For example, where it relates to more than one child in a school or in a household contracting the disease, what is the date on which a child returns if another child has the disease at home? And then, I suppose, just to say, yeah, no, I'll leave it at that for now.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy, I suppose I should point out that I would appreciate and understand absolutely why this is an area of huge concern. It's an area of huge concern within education facilities, but indeed in wider society as well. And I would like to acknowledge the very close working relationship and the excellent work undertaken by public health in terms of care of our schools and if there's an incident in our schools. And I'd like to point out also that we have enhanced the school teams, obviously still led by public health because it's their determination that qualifies everything within the school, but we have added to the supports of the public health teams for the benefit of schools. There's phone lines in place operating on a 7-day basis. There's also, in terms of the issues that you have raised that the partners in education might have, again, just to say to you, there are weekly meetings with the partners in education and public health, a very positive move, and I think that has been very positively embraced by the partners in education also. So, and just in relation to guidelines and being updated or changed or whatever they might be, obviously, public health have the freedom to constantly review and update guidelines as they need to be, and when they do that, we act accordingly.
Deputy.
Minister, I suppose weekly meetings are valuable, but there needs to be progress as well, obviously. One of the issues is in relation to communication. Part of that is the communication at a local level between the HSE and the schools. And there are schools that you will know have expressed frustration in relation to that. In some instances it's worked perfectly, in other instances it hasn't worked so well, and I'm sure you'll be aware of some of those instances. I think we need to look at there is a balance to be struck here, but there is scope under Regulation 11 of the Infectious Diseases Regulation 81 and under Article 9 of the GDPR, in light of the overarching objective of public health. I think there is discretion for better communication between the HSE and the school. I think this would help in certain cases. But I also think there is, to some extent, on a global level, I think there isn't, and I suppose on an overall picture level, there isn't enough communication. And I think, Minister, I think you have a bit more to contribute here, and I think it was welcome. I saw you in the after-school hub, but I think perhaps some of the weekly briefings I wrote to you a few months ago in relation to this, I think that we need more communication from the centre in terms of the overall picture, because when you don't have that, there is a vacuum, and in that vacuum there exists speculation. I'm sure you'll be aware of a lot of that yourself, so we need to nip that in the bud, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. As I said, and I'll reiterate, there has been huge engagement between public health and schools. The school teams process is working particularly well. and I think that's to general acceptance all around, partners in education and schools on the ground, that the school teams are doing a very good job, and that I suppose that it has improved and it has added to communication levels between schools and public health. Equally so, the provision of webinars for school leaders and information being made available, also very positively embraced. And indeed, officials from my department on an ongoing basis are meeting with the partners in education and public health in terms of addressing any individual and any general queries that they might have.
Thank you very much. Question 30, Deputy Francis Noel Duffy.
Thank you, Corla, and thank you, Minister, for taking my question. I'd like to ask what measures are in place to ensure adequate heating and ventilation is in schools temporarily accommodated in prefabs in view of COVID-19 guidelines. Schools are doing their best to ensure students are in the safest environment possible. As advised by the department, teachers are encouraged to keep windows and doors open to allow for ventilation. However, without adequate heating infrastructure, this often means teachers and school children are left extremely cold.
Practical steps for the deployment of good ventilation practices was provided to the schools in August in the context of reopening for September 2020. This guidance has recently been reviewed and was circulated to the education partners for their feedback, and the updated guidance has now been published. In terms of good ventilation practices in schools, it is important, particularly as we get further into winter, that we achieve an appropriate balance between good ventilation and comfort in the schools. The overall approach for schools should be to have windows open as fully as possible when classrooms are not in use, for example during break times, lunch times and at the end of each school day, and partially open when classrooms are in use to achieve appropriate airflow. It is worth noting that windows do not need to be open as wide in windy or cold weather in order to achieve the same level of airflow into the classroom. This will assist in managing comfort levels in classrooms during periods of colder weather, including those in prefabricated accommodation. As part of managing comfort levels in classrooms, schools should check that their heating systems are set at the recommended manufacturer's guidance levels to maximise the available heat to the school. In addition, heating should operate for extended periods during colder weather to counteract as best as possible the impact of windows being open, partially when classrooms are in use and fully when not in use, in order to maintain an appropriate balance between ventilation and comfort levels.
Duffy.
Thank you, Minister. The issue of capacity and availability of resources to comfortably accommodate students brings me to my next point about the broader challenges schools have faced adapting to COVID-19 guidelines. Some schools have had to undertake significant remedial works in a short amount of time using the limited minor works funding, and are still struggling to accommodate students in appropriate teaching environments. Minister, can your department advise if the minor works grants will be available next summer to conduct works outside of COVID-19, where the minor works grant can be used for typical summer projects that normally use this funding? The minor works funding is primarily there to allow schools to upkeep their buildings. COVID-19 will mean schools have effectively lost this funding for 2 years.
Minister.
Thank you, Corla. Just to say, Deputy, that the minor works grant has been paid twice this year into schools. It was paid in August time and will be paid again in December. And it gives schools the autonomy to do what needs to be done, or whatever that they might specifically identify within the school that requires work, and that can be a very wide capacity of work. It can be limited to one area, or it can be finance that's dispersed into a variety of different projects within the school, and I think that's a very positive movement for schools, and I would have to say the uptake on it has been exceptional, and it has been greeted very positively by schools. There is also, of course, if there is other works to be done, there is the emergency work scheme, there is the summer work scheme, and but to date, I think there has been no question of funding being made available to schools for works that needed to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Unfortunately, for many schools, the minor works grant does not allow schools adequately accommodate school children in adherence to COVID-19 guidelines. Many schools have had to undertake significant structural changes to ensure students would arrive to a safe environment. I've witnessed this myself. So can the department support schools, particularly DEIS schools, undertaking significant remedial works necessary to safely accommodate students in cases where the minor works grant is not enough? This currently is having an impact on the Sacred Heart Senior National School in Killinarden, as I'm sure this is the same case in other DEIS schools across the country.
Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Just to reiterate, for example, in terms of, in terms of minor works, we're talking about an allocation of 75 million in August time and 55 million now in December time. And for example, a school with 1,000 pupils would have received, we'd say in the first tranche last August, €110,000, substantial funding going into schools, and again, funding, as I say, to come again in December. However, the specific case that you raise, I will take the detail on that one. Obviously, where there are other extraordinary measures, we do say to individual schools that they might revert to the department so that we might look at individual cases. But I do want to be very, very clear. I think, without contradiction, there has been a general acceptance that the amount of money in excess of 500 million now that has been provided to schools in terms of a variety of different works, whether it's minor works or whether it's provision of payment for PPE or whatever else is required within the school, has been quite remarkable. Thank you.
Deputy Brendan Smith, question number 31.
Thank you, Can Corda. Minister, my question refers to Coláiste Kingscourt, County Cavan. This school opened in August 2016 and already it has exceeded its capacity. The projected attendance at the school was 450 and at present the enrolment is 530 after 5 years. So the indications are that the enrolment will continue to grow. It's a highly regarded school. It has been very successful, and the Cavan and ETB and the school and the Board of Management and the wider school community are very anxious that the application for additional permanent accommodation should be progressed by your department as soon as possible. And I appreciate the opportunity I had to discuss this matter with you some months ago, Minister. Thank you, Can Corda.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, and I do want to acknowledge your personal interest in moving this forward and your engagement with me on a number of occasions in relation to this. I can confirm that the Department is in receipt of an application for additional school accommodation from the School Authority, as you refer to it. The application is currently being assessed, and once completed, the School Authority will be informed of the outcome. Where capacity issues arise, it may not always be as a result of lack of accommodation, but may be driven by a number of factors. Duplication of applications, pupils may have applied for a place to a number of schools in the area. School of choice, pupils can't get a place in their preferred school whilst there are places in other schools in the town or area. Some towns or areas have single-sex schools, and while places are available in the school, they are not available to all pupils. And then, of course, there's the external draw of pupils coming from outside to a particular local area. Until these issues are discussed with the relevant school authorities, the true extent of any capacity issue will only then become known. Similar to the processes adopted in advance of the current academic year, the Department is currently engaging with patron bodies, including the patron in question, to identify particular and specific capacity requirements for the forthcoming year, which may necessitate action. Deputy.
Smith.
I thank the Minister for a reply. Minister, I was closely involved with one of your predecessors, Deputy Bat O'Keefe, at the time in getting the school approved for Kingscourt, and of course there was a lot of cynicism that there was no need for a school, but the enrolment and the projection by the department at that time and by the then VEC was that 450 would be adequate capacity. Thankfully today the enrolment is 530 and the projected enrolment for 2024 is 815. Thankfully, in that area, there is very substantial employment. There has been a huge growth in population, and each of the feeder primary schools has recorded over the past number of years growth in enrolment as well. With the continuation in movement of population to the area and the number of houses being built there as well, it's evident that the primary schools and those feeder primary schools will continue to grow, and that will literally provide more and more students for Coláiste. I had the opportunity to visit the school after school time some months ago, and I saw there at first hand the pride that all the principal and all the staff take in ensuring that the best possible educational services are delivered to all the students attending Coláiste.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And again, I am aware, as you've said, that when it opened in 2016, it was for 400 pupils, and it's currently at 530. So there has been a huge growth there, and I know the applications with the department since April 2019. Just to say to you that discussions are ongoing with the ETB to agree the long-term projection, if you like, the long-term projected enrolment for the school, and that process is, I am informed, nearing very close completion. And I am aware that the application that the school has made is for 11 general classrooms and 8 additional specialist rooms as well. And just as I say to you on the positive side, that the discussions with the ETB as regards the potential going forward and to finalise so that we don't find ourselves in this position, I suppose, down the line in terms of capacity of enrolment going forward, that's nearing completion. Here.
Thank you. Deputy Smith.
Thank you, Cairn. Thank the Minister. Minister, some time ago, at the request of the Chairman of the Board of Management of Coláiste-Dúnarí, Councillor Clifford Kelly, I met the Parents Association and some of the staff, and it was so clear to me the pride that they take in their school and what the precautions they put in place with every safety guideline implemented very strictly that were given by Public Health and by your own department in regard to the provision of education at the present time. Councillor Clifford Kelly has been a powerful advocate for that school over many years. I work closely with him and with other public representatives in the local community. John Carney and his colleagues, the CEO of the ETB and his colleagues, and Fergal Boyle, the principal of the school, and all his staff colleagues, all of them work together as a team. They're very determined to get this application over the line, to have that additional accommodation provided. And Minister, I'm aware of the projections and the long-term projections that the ETB provided in their application. I did some homework myself, and I have to say that it's relatively conservative that the projected enrolment would be 815 by 2024, and I have no doubt that the figures that have been provided to your department with the application are absolutely solid, and that additional accommodation is needed. So Minister, I'd appreciate if it could be advanced as soon as possible.
Minister.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Yes, I do appreciate the work that has been done to date. I do appreciate, and you have referenced many individuals who have contributed to the development of the school, and I think the fact, from 400 to 530 and the projections that we're talking about now, I think that's testament, to the hard work and the determination and the generosity of so many who are willing to work on a common agenda, which is for the betterment of education provision in an area. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I do, as I say, acknowledge again that the department are currently finalising with the ETB the projected figures going forward. They will be adjudicated on, and as quickly as is at all possible, there will be an adjudication on that. But again, Deputy, I do thank you for your determination and focus in moving this forward. Thank you
very much. Question 32 is Deputy Pauline Tully's.
Minister, can you please outline the position regarding the Education of Persons with Special Education Needs Act 2004, more commonly referred to as the EPSIN Act, which has never been fully commenced despite being a central strand of the National Disability Strategy. So children with disabilities and learning needs cannot access assessments with a right of appeal, or individual education plans have not been placed on a statutory basis. So do you and your department have any plans to fully commence the Act?
Thank you, Deputy, for your question. And a number of sections of the EPSIN Act, the Education for Persons with Special Needs, have been commenced. And the commenced provisions include those establishing the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE, and those providing for an inclusive approach to the education of children with special educational needs. And the remaining sections of the Act, as you mentioned, have not yet been commenced. However, the Government has continued to invest in the area of special education support. And next year, the Department will invest approximately £2 billion in the area of special education needs. That's a fifth of the Department's budget and up over 50% since 2011. And since EPSIN was acted, the Department's policy on supporting children with SEN has changed and evolved on foot of evidence-based policy advice from the NCSE, which takes account of international perspectives. And significantly, the focus of special needs education provision has changed from a model that is diagnosis-led to one which is driven by the needs of the child. And this is a substantially different view to the one that underlies the EPSIN Act. The levels of investment by government in special education has increased to facilitate the underlying reforms required to implement and embed the needs-based approach. And this change is evidenced by the introduction of new allocation models for special education teachers and indeed special needs assistants. And one of my key objectives As Minister for Special Education, and you may recall, Deputy, that I recently published my action priorities for the next few years, one of which is to carry out a review of the Education for Persons with Special Education Needs Act. And this review will take into account the extent of additional investment made in special education services since 2004 and the move, as I said, towards a needs-based approach. And I will also work with colleagues in government to ensure a joined-up approach and a continuum of support for children with SEN.
Thank you, Minister Madigan. Deputy Tully.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah, as you mentioned, there are some of the aspects of the Act were commenced, such as the establishment of the NCSE, and I know they prepared an implementation report way back in 2006, which set out a sequence in which the remaining revisions of the Act should be commenced, and estimated a level of investment at that time for implementation. And it was planned to implement it by 2010, but a decision was taken in 2008 to suspend the implementation, and I'm not sure exactly why that was, whether it was to do with the level of investment that was required. I know an independent appeals element had been established. There was a Special Education Appeals Board, but when the term of the inaugural board ended, no new board was formed. It just seemed to end, and there were elements there that were supposed to be commenced and didn't. And I know you've said there's a level of investment and some things have changed, and there's been much speculation around when the Act will be fully implemented, and it will be called by some representative groups on behalf of children with special needs that this Act should be fully commenced. So I'm just wondering, will the government publish a plan then to say whether they're going to actually implement the rest of the EPSN Act or put something else in its place, or what exactly are the plans?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. As you appreciate, I've only recently published my action priorities, and as I said, one of those priorities is to conduct a review of the EPSN Act in its entirety. And the premise of that really is, as I said, is because we're moving away since 2004, which is quite 16 years since it was originally enacted. We've moved quite substantially away from this diagnosis-led model to a needs-based model. And also, one of the issues why it hadn't been commenced, from my understanding, is from a cost perspective. What the NCSE, I think, and the department had estimated is that over a period of years it would have cost about €235 million per annum to implement and to commence all of the priorities or the parts of the Act that haven't yet been commenced. I mean, the criteria that I will be using, so I'll be reviewing the areas where SEN policy has evolved since the EPSN and how best to progress the aspects of the EPSN Act on a non-statutory basis as well. And I also, just to finish, Cancor, I'll be looking at new challenges in the area of SEN that may have arisen since then.
Deputy Tully, and a supplementary then from Deputy O'Leary.
It's just, I suppose, failure to implement the EPSN Act fully or something similar in its place will run contrary to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Because under Article 24 of the Convention, the Government is obliged to ensure that children with a disability are not excluded from the general education system on the basis of disability. We need to provide a more inclusive society in all aspects of our life, which includes our education. And I mean, the new Oireachtas Committee on Disability Matters established last month, it has the very important role of overseeing the full implementation of the UNCPRD. But recently at a meeting of the committee, when they asked a question about the EPSN Act, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission replied they did not feel the Act was fit for purpose and was outdated, but the National Disability Authority stated it should be implemented and needs to be implemented in order to fulfil our role under the UN Convention. So I'm just wondering, which one is correct there. I would presume the provisions within the Act will need to be updated to reflect, as you said, 16 years have passed since it was initially introduced. But I mean, where it's practical, I think we need to integrate children into a mainstream school. It doesn't suit all children, we know that, but where it does and where they choose to, we need to ensure that they have the support to allow them to access mainstream education.
Deputy O'Leary.
Minister, just two things in relation to things the way that they're happening just at the minute. The first is in relation to the new modelication of SNAs, and my experience is that it is where schools experience a sudden relative increase in the number of needs in a classroom, that the model is not responsive enough to them. Previously was the case. If you had a child with autism joined your class, you would be guaranteed they'd have an SNA. That doesn't seem to be the case at this point in time. And add to that, And just as an aside, like, I mean, the fact that there is still a bias against girls in the allocation of SNAs and special education teachers, I've never understood it, still don't understand it, still don't understand the basis for it, and you might consider that. But the other point is, and you reference, I suppose, some of the changes that may be coming with progressing disability and the teams in relation to that. A significant concern of special schools is that they will lose their multidisciplinary teams. Can you give a commitment that that won't be happening as progressing disability is expanded throughout the country?
So, just to address Deputy Tully's, when I say that I'm going to conduct a review of the EPSAN Act, I'll be conducting a review of it in its entirety, even the parts that have been commenced. But I still think that Section 2 of the EPSAN Act, when you're talking about that inclusive education, still stands. You know, a child with special education needs shall be educated in an inclusive environment with children who do not have such needs unless the nature or degree of those needs is such that to do so would be inconsistent with A, the best interests of the child, and B, the effective provision of education for children with whom the child is to be educated. And to me that sums it up in a nutshell in relation to special education in general, and I'll be using that as a premise for conducting all of my review. Just briefly, Deputy, I think you have a question on SNAs to come, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'll check out the bias in relation to girls. I can check that out for you. With SNAs, it's always open to school to engage with the exception review process if they feel that they haven't got sufficient allocation of SNAs. And obviously they were frozen for this year, so there was no impact because of COVID. And one of the things that I ensured in this budget with an amount of 14.7 million was that we would immediately replace any SNA for whatever reason would be absent.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Moynihan, Deputy Michael Moynihan, you have question 33.
Good morning, Ceann Corlett, to ask the Minister for Education and Skills if she is satisfied that the Department is working with parents to address transportation needs of pupils with disabilities, and if she'll make a statement on the matter.
School transport is a significant operation managed by Bus Éireann on behalf of the Department of Education, as you would be aware, Deputy. In the 2019-2020 school year, over 120,000 children were transported in over 5,000 vehicles on a daily basis to primary and post-primary schools throughout the country, covering over 100 million kilometres at a cost of over 219 million in 2019. The Department is very conscious of the specialised nature of transport provision for children with special education needs, and this is reflected in the approach that is taken. In the current school year, there are over 14,500 children on special education needs or SEN school transport, an increase of 5,300 children since 2013. The Department funded the school transport scheme in 2019 in the amount of just over 219 million, with 53% of this having been allocated to spend on the transport scheme for children with special education needs. The purpose of the SEN Transport Scheme is, having regard to available resources, to support the transport to and from school of children with special education needs. Under the terms of the scheme, children are eligible for transport where they have special education needs arising from a diagnosed disability and are attending the nearest recognised mainstream school, special class, special school or unit that is or can be resourced to meet their special education needs. Where practical, my department will consider the provision of specific or individual transport arrangements in circumstances where travel in the company of other children is not deemed feasible. In addition, there is facility within the Special Needs Transport Scheme for the appointment of a school bus escort where a child's care and safety needs while in school transport are such as to require this support. All eligible children are exempt from school transport charges, and a special transport grant towards the cost of private transport arrangements may be provided at the discretion of the Department in certain situations where, for example, the child's care for medical needs as such make the provision of a transport service impractical. While the closing date for receipt of applications for school transport in general is the last Friday in April in any given year for the following school year, the Department accepts applications all year round for the SEN Transport Scheme. As the Deputy may be aware, public health advice issued to the Department in late August, which recommended that all post-primary transport services operate at 50% capacity. This is being implemented across all SEN services on which post-primary aged children travel. The School Transport Scheme for children with special education needs is providing for the transportation needs of pupils with disabilities.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Moynihan.
Good morning, Minister. Thank you very much. I suppose I have two specific cases here, and they can be general as well. But I have one case where the Department of where the pupil was travelling to post-primary school for the first time, and they went for the special transport, and they accommodated them on the taxi service that was being run to that school. Unfortunately, due to the child's needs, it didn't work out, and the parents came on, have been doing the school run themselves, and they have tried to switch from the taxi service to the special grant that's available for kids with special needs, and they're finding it hugely difficult to process it through the Department of Education to get a clear guidance from the department. And I think that there should be some mechanism within the department to just be able to deal with, like, you know, and you outlined the figures, you outlined the funding, and you outlined the changes that have happened, but it is a specialised type of transport, particularly for kids who cannot travel with other kids, and for whatever reason it is. And another,
Thank you, Deputy.
I come back in a supplementary.
Yes, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Specifically in relation to the case that you referenced there in terms of a special transport grant, just to outline exactly how that actually works. The special transport grant towards the cost of private transport arrangements may be provided at the discretion of the department in situations where Bus Éireann is not in a position to provide a transport service, or where a child's age, behavioural difficulties or medical needs are such as to make the provision of a transport service impractical, or an escort is considered necessary and the provision of such support is not feasible, or the cost of establishing or maintaining a service is considered prohibitive. And just as you specifically referenced the case there, obviously I'm not familiar with the individual case, but if it meets any of these criteria, and perhaps it does, if you would give me maybe the detail on that, and I would ask my officials to investigate and maybe expedite it. But there is a very clear acknowledgement within the department that in some instances it is necessary for a grant of this nature, the special transport grant, to be paid.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I appreciate that offer, and I will take it up immediately. The other issue is in relation to kids that would have attended a special school, and because it being the nearest special school to them, and that they may have the setting or that their needs are met better in a special school that is further away from them, and the decision of the parents to transfer their child to a other special school was supported by documentation from professionals, from consultants, from people that would have assisted the parents in making the decision. And they have been supported by numerous reports, have sent that on to the Department of Education, but the Department have been reluctant to go outside the terms of the scheme or go outside the nearest school issue. But the question I put to you, Minister, is that there should be flexibility within the Department when a decision that's outside of the norm, when a decision that is not within the criteria of the scheme is supported by expert psychologist reports and other information, that there should be a mechanism there, you know, as in other departments, enforcement,
okay.
so
Minister,
forth.
to conclude, please.
Thank you, Count Corla, and thank you, Deputy. Again, I suppose just referencing the previous case that you've raised, there is, considerable flexibility and acknowledgement, within the department that not necessarily does one size fit all. And for that reason, as I pointed out in terms of the special transport grant and the various criteria, that criteria is fairly wide in terms of eligibility and making provision for maybe personally providing transport for children based on their specific needs or bus errands and their capacity or whatever. Just to point out in general as well in terms of the nearest school and issues that might arise there, to reference again that there is a review pending of the entire transport scheme, but specifically the case that you referenced there, I would be very pleased if you would make me aware of the specific detail in relation to the individual concerned and the needs required, and I will commit to you that we will certainly take a look at the individual case.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Question 34.
August Cian Corla, Minister, and I suppose I'm not sure which Minister is necessarily going to take this, because while naturally enough I suppose I have a specific case in mind, it goes to the broad issue of school staff and high risk versus very high risk. And the fact is, and I've made this point before, that very high risk is a very high threshold, and that there are many people who are severely immunocompromised, who are high risk with very serious conditions such as leukemia and others, and they are concerned. And in some instances, schools want to offer them more flexibility, but they're not permitted to do so at this point in time.
Minister.
Specifically in relation to SNAs, Deputy O'Leary, I'm not sure if it is. My understanding is that it is, but you know.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's the same principle, so whatever answer you have.
Yeah, so my understanding across the board is that there is an occupational health service provision there specifically for teachers, and this would include SNAs as well as essential workers, and those that are at very high risk. You know, can take COVID leave, but those that are at high risk should be at work, and that's really the status of that. And I think that every school at least has a lead worker representative whose role is to represent staff on it. But you know, for COVID reasons, somebody shouldn't not be at work if they are high risk. It's only if they're at very high risk that they shouldn't work. But they, you know, the occupational health service provider is Medmark Healthcare Limited, and they could ask them to review their status if they do have concerns. And I know Medmark has a process in place for staff who have health concerns, which you enunciated. And there has been, I have to say, comprehensive and intensive engagement with education stakeholders, including school management bodies and staff representatives, to ensure that schools open safely. Each school, as you know, has a COVID-19 response plan, and included in that are practical steps to minimise and to prevent the risk of infection. So that is the status in relation to that. And, you know, it's quite important to say and to stress as well, which I think I already have to you, Deputy, on a few occasions. When we reopened the schools, we put aside 14.7 million specifically for SNAs, caretakers and school secretaries, so that there would be an immediate replacement of those SNAs, because obviously their role is absolutely essential. You know, and I want to thank them for all the work that they've done to date in keeping the schools open, and in particular looking after children with special needs, because children with special needs simply cannot function in a school environment without an SNA present. So the work is absolutely vital.
Minister, I suppose I'll speak maybe first of all just about the specific case I have in mind, obviously anonymously, you know, just in terms of the brass tacks of it. So this SNA, they are high risk. I would say in the ordinary meaning of the word, they're very high risk, but they haven't met that threshold in terms of Medmar. Their doctor, their principal and the Board of Management agreed that it's not safe for them to return to school. But because of the process that's there, they must go into every day, or they would have to take a decision to take a leave of absence or potentially risk their health in doing so. This principal was more than happy for them to be paired with a medically vulnerable student. It would have suited everyone in the equation to learn from home and learning to continue online in the particular instance of high infection in the community. So I do believe there is a rigidity there. Obviously, the overall philosophy of where you can attend and where it's safe for you to attend, that is right, but there's a rigidity there in terms of the harder cases, and perhaps I'll return to that in my final contribution, but I think we need to consider that.
Of what you're saying, Deputy, and that's one of the reasons why when we, in the school reopening plan, we provided 30 million towards PPE, which is absolutely critical for the role of an SNA, and in order for an SNA to carry out their functions not just adequately but safely, because often they can move from room to room, and they need medical grade masks when they're within 2 metres distance from a child with special needs. And I see what you're saying in relation to the rigidity of the process, but I would say to you, as I said in my initial contribution, is that they can ask Medmark to review their status. And I would imagine that Medmark should take into account the views of the Board of Management and the views of the principal of the school to sustain that. And perhaps it may well be that they're very high risk as opposed to high risk, and are therefore not in a position to work on the normal course of events.
You mentioned the issue of SNAs should be provided with those medical grade masks that you've just mentioned, because the reality is, for the vast majority of SNAs, the instances in which they'd be moving to situations that they're within 2 metres and without occurs very frequently throughout the day. So I think it's the easiest thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do. The problem with the Medmark stuff, and even the fact that there is an appeal, I understand that very few have been successful in that appeal, is that it's to do with the same criteria and it's the same categorisation. So very high risk is a very high threshold. High risk is a very broad category. It goes from everything from mild asthma right to leukemia and liver failure and other things like that. But the fact that you get a review doesn't necessarily change the fact that we take an overall view of this individual member of staff and say, actually, you know, in the broad circumstances, it would probably be better if they're at home. It only goes to whether they have one of the conditions that qualifies them as very high risk. So ultimately, it doesn't really change things. And Dr. Ronan Glynn, when he was in the COVID committee, told me that regardless of the categorisation by Medmark, each individual must be treated as an individual with their own specific set of circumstances. So I think in those minority of cases where the Medmark process proves to be too blunt and that they are at the higher end of high risk but not qualified for very high risk, I think we need a bespoke approach here.
I appreciate again the sentiment, Deputy, and I appreciate the fact that you have a particular person in mind in relation to this. And I would stress the fact that in the COVID-19 response plan, and in addition to that, which each school has at least one lead worker representative whose role is to represent staff and to represent people in the predicament that you're talking about. And you know, the role of an SNA in particular is, as I said, crucial. You know, we have grown the amount of SNAs by 78% since 2011, and one of the things we want to ensure is that every SNA is in a position to look after the children with special needs. So it's of particular importance to me that they are adequately protected. And you mentioned the fact about medical grade masks, and obviously they should be wearing those, or a surgical mask where they're within 2 metres, and or a proper visor if it's not practical for any reason, a visor that's of suitable quality for a healthcare setting, which should protect them from getting infection or indeed infecting somebody else.
Thank you very much. Deputy McBarry has question 36.
So the question is to ask the Minister if she will consider initiating an investigation into allegations that females in a school were asked not to wear certain items of clothing due to it allegedly being revealing, if she will report on measures taken to counter sexism in schools, and if she will make a statement on the matter.
Minister.
The Department of Education has made initial contact with the school and are engaging further to establish the facts in this case in order to provide a report for my attention. It is important to note that decisions on school uniform policies are a matter for the school's Board of Management at local level. Schools are advised to consult with parents and students when drafting a policy on uniforms. The Department provides funding and policy direction for schools and has legal powers to investigate individual complaints where the complaint involves a refused enrolment, expulsion or suspension in accordance with Section 29 of the 1998 Education Act. The Department's role is also to clarify for parents and students how their grievances and complaints against schools are and can be progressed. With regard to the broader question posed by the Deputy, I agree that there is no place for sexist attitudes in Irish society, including in our schools. The Department has been working along with other government departments and agencies to support the full implementation of the National Women and Girls Strategy 2017-2020. The vision of the strategy is an Ireland where all women enjoy equality with men and can achieve their full potential while enjoying a safe and fulfilling life. The overall goal of the strategy is to change attitudes and practices preventing women's and girls' full participation in education, employment and public life at all levels, and to improve services for women and girls with priority given to the needs of those experiencing or at risk of experiencing the poorest outcomes. It is the aim of the Department that every child has access to equitable education and that each learner feels safe and happy in the school environment at every stage. The curriculum at both primary and post-primary aims to foster inclusivity where equality and diversity are promoted. Attitudes towards gender are primarily explored in the social, personal and health education curriculum. This is addressed in an age-appropriate manner from primary level through to senior cycle. At each level, multiple strands of the SPHE curriculum examine gender roles or stereotyping and their adverse effect, particularly in relation to gender and sex. As a part of the curriculum, students explore and deepen their awareness of stereotyping and its influence on attitudes and behaviour. Thank you.
Deputy Barley.
Okay, so the school in question is being asked for a report. So I would like to ask you, are the school authorities alone being asked to supply that report, or is contact being made with the student body to get a report and information back from the student body? Because something happened in that school. I mean, the idea that a petition would come forward with thousands of names to be signed for no reason, the idea that protests took place in the school, including boys coming into school wearing leggings and skirts in solidarity with the girl students, that people would do this for no reason. The idea that nothing happened or that it was a misunderstanding. I'm raising a question about that. I think those questions need to be asked, and I think information needs to be got, not just from the school authorities, but from the student body themselves. And I also would like, as part of that report, to know if any of the boys who took part in that protest were suspended, how long they were suspended for, and why.
Thank you. Could I say at the outset that it is important that in an instance of any instance that pertains to a school, that each individual school is given the time and space to address the situation as it arises and to make a determination. My department has already engaged with the school and is continuing to engage with the school, and a report will be furnished to me once that engagement is concluded. The engagement is obviously, in the first instance, the Board of Management does have responsibility for the day-to-day running of the school. You would be aware of that, Deputy, and they have the autonomy in terms of the running of the school. Primarily, the Department has control over, as I have outlined for you, policy and funding of the school, and in particular instances where an individual complaint involves refused enrolment, an expulsion or a suspension. In terms of this current report, the initial engagement with the school does involve a determination of what occurred, how it occurred, who was involved and who was impacted, and when that report is available to me, I will study it in due course.
The broader issue of sexism in schools, I think it's fair to say that young people in general, including teenagers, have been ahead of the curve in Irish society on social issues. They were ahead of the curve on the issue of LGBT rights, including gay marriage. They were ahead of the curve on the issue of abortion rights. And I think they're ahead of the curve on the issue of sexism in schools as well. I think they asked many legitimate questions about policies in school, including policies around uniforms, policies around sport in schools, around the question of subject choice, around the rights of trans students in the schools, and around how serious school authorities take the question of, some school authorities, the question of sexist name-calling. I think that overwhelmingly the victims of this are girls and non-binary people, although boys can be affected by sexist stereotyping as well. For example, school bans on long hair, the wearing of earrings, and so on. So my question is, what measures have been taken and what measures intend to be taken to address this issue, which I believe is a feature within the school system?
Thank you very much. Minister, to conclude.
Thank you, Deputy. In the first instance, Deputy, could I concur with you? The importance of the student voice is immeasurable in the school community, and I think testament to that is the manner in which the student voice is very much integrated into all actions within the department in terms of consultation with partners in education. You would be aware that the student voice was a critical voice in terms of the calculated grades process. Every step of the line, the student voice was represented. And indeed, I would say to you that in the first instance, in terms of calculated grades, that proposal actually came from students themselves. Equally so, in terms of curriculum reform, the student voice is embedded in the consultation process undertaken by the NCCA and other initiatives of that nature. Could I also say to you that the entire curriculum that's provided in the school is considered to be for all learners, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, socio-economic background, gender or orientation. And it is the aim of the department that every child has access to equitable education and that every learner feels safe and happy in the school environment at every stage of their experience of the school environment. The curriculum at both primary and post-primary aims to foster inclusivity, where equality and diversity are promoted.
Sorry now, but we must move to question 37, which is Deputy Rose Conway-Walsh's.
Minister, I want to ask whether, in your view, cleaners are critical staff in the running of schools, and whether that view will be reflected in how you approach pension reforms for long-term service cleaners. Cleaners have always played a central and vital role in our schools, but with COVID their importance has increased. Does your department have any plans to move the cleaners into the public service pension scheme to reflect their critical role in health and safety of children?
Thank you, Deputy. I do absolutely recognise the important role that cleaners play in the successful operation of our schools in every year, but particularly so in the COVID-19 context. I'm very conscious of the superb work on an ongoing basis that is taking place by the cleaners in our schools. Currently, each school is required to have a COVID-19 response plan for safe operation through the prevention, early detection and control of COVID-19 in line with public health advice. Cleaning is an important aspect of infection prevention control measures in schools to minimise the risk of transmission of infection. Significant additional funding has been provided to all schools for putting in place additional cleaning. Funding is provided on a per capita basis. As the Deputy may be aware, cleaners are employed by schools directly using the ancillary grant mechanism to schools. In ETB schools, cleaners are employed directly by the ETB. The provision of a pension is therefore a matter for the respective individual school or ETB. Schools and ETBs are employers are obliged to provide access to a personal retirement savings account. In line with the Roadmap for Pensions Reform 2018-2023, the Government has committed to develop and implement a state-sponsored automatic enrolment supplementary retirement savings system by 2022. Under automatic enrolment, employees without personal retirement savings and who meet certain age and earnings criteria will be automatically enrolled into a state-sponsored, quality-assured supplementary retirement savings system with freedom of choice, of course, as always, to opt out.
Minister, to say that we give schools the money and they are responsible, I believe, is an abdication of responsibility. While they not be legally defined as such, they certainly are public servants. It's argued that they are not employees of the state, despite the fact that the body that employs them on a long-term basis is funded by the state. The third reason put forward is that they have not been a public sector pension contribution throughout their working life. I would argue that they have not been given the right to do so. They, like many others, are undervalued workers inside our public services. I would call on the Minister to review the situation.
Thank you, Deputy. Again, I'll reiterate, I don't for 1 minute undervalue or underestimate the value and importance of the work of support staff, in particular, as you've instanced here, cleaners. But I must point out to you that it is a fact that cleaners are employed directly by schools using the ancillary grant, and that is how it is operational presently. In ETB schools, cleaners are employed directly by the ETB, but that is the mechanism as it exists. The provision of a pension is therefore a matter for the individual school if they're employed through the school and the capitation grant, or the individual ETB if they're employers of the ETB. But I will reiterate, as I've said previously to you, schools and ETBs as employers then are obliged to provide access to the personal retirement savings account. And that is the current situation as it exists. But equally so, as I've outlined to you earlier, there is the roadmap for pension reform, and there is the mechanism anticipated by 2022 for the automatic enrolment, which should come on stream with an opt-in, opt-out choice, obviously, in the near future.
Conway Walsh.
Thank you, Minister. We have heard all of those arguments before. We've heard them when it came to school secretaries and caretakers. Now, recently, the Government has finally agreed to sit down for talks to regularise the pay conditions and employment and pension provision of school secretaries and caretakers, and this certainly is a welcome development. I look forward to an outcome that they have waited a long time for. They are critical components of our education system and deserve to have that rightly reflected in their work and pay conditions. The situation for long-term service cleaners in schools are very similar. They are long-term employees of the public system, and they do not currently have access to a public service pension. We have many cleaners in schools who have been there for decades. And I just believe that there's an unfairness within the system, that they are not entitled to pension rights in the way that other workers are. And I would ask you just to look at it, see if it can be reviewed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Again, I will reiterate, as you say, many workers of long standing contributing very positively and vitally to the school environment, and most especially doing so in a COVID-19 atmosphere. And indeed, I know myself from personal experience doing so on a very generous basis, and doing so very willingly and very positively, and doing so oftentimes above and beyond the call of duty. I absolutely want to recognise that. I have seen it, observed it and been part of it myself for very many years. But I will say to you, as it currently stands, I must say that that cleaners are employed by schools, as I've said, by the grant mechanism or directly by the ETB. We will see in terms of 2022 and the automatic enrolment supplementary retirement savings system and how that will work. But equally so, just to say to you, I like this mechanism, like everything else, and I said previously to Deputy O'Leary, everything is under review. But there is an acknowledgement that as it exists currently, this is this is how it exists currently.
Minister, question 38 is Deputy Patrick Costellos.
Thank you, Chair Corley. Thank you, Minister. Well, I'm curious to know the plans of the Department in relation to autism-specific schools and the unique service they can provide for the children who need them. My concerns are, of course, with the dedicated campaigners in the Dublin 12 campaign for autism-specific school and inclusion. I know that Deputy Smith will has been very supportive of them. Would love to hear the answer in relation to that as well. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. My department's policy is to provide for the inclusive education of autistic students in mainstream schools to the greatest extent possible. Autism, as we know, is a spectrum condition. So some autistic students require relatively little support in school and are largely independent in their learning, while others require significant levels of support. And there is therefore not one preferred educational approach for autistic students. Rather, there is a range of provision, sometimes described as a continuum, which takes into account the assessed educational needs of individual students. And all students with special education needs are served by this continuum of provision, ranging from full-time enrolment in classes in mainstream schools with or without additional supports, to a special class in a mainstream school, to full-time enrolment in special schools. And this continuum is supported by significant investment by government, 2 billion or 20% of the total education spend. And this funds the provision of additional teachers, special needs assistants and other supports required to enable children with special needs access education. And my department policy is that new special schools are to be designated as community special schools and resourced to serve those children within those communities who require special school placement, rather than be limited to any specific category of disability. And the NCSE has been asked to provide policy advice on the future of special schools and classes, and that advice, as I mentioned to Deputy O'Leary earlier on, is expected before the end of the year. And the evidence-based advice will take account of local and international perspectives, including the views of stakeholders. And in the meantime, my department will continue to support the current continuum of provision, which includes special class and special school places. And there is obviously, Deputy, specialised provision for children with autism. and there are now 1,836 special classes in place compared to only 548 in 2011. So there has been significant progress already.
Both ministers in relation to this. Both of you have actually met with this campaign group, and both of you have made time to meet them. What I would say is I think it would be very beneficial if you could come down and meet with them and see the site that they are proposing. There's an empty school building. They've engaged with the owners of the building. They have found a patron themselves. They are putting all the pieces together, and it'd be really positive if you could come down and see it. There's several schools in the area. There's 2 health centres providing the speech and language, the OT, the multidisciplinary supports that the children who would be ultimately using the school need. And there is, from the NCSE report, a lack of provision in the area already. So really, there's an opportunity here to create that community that you speak of, that community, an educational hub where all the children and parents can be together, literally across the road from each other and across the road from the other services they need. There's an amazing opportunity here, and as I say, I would encourage you guys to come and meet the campaigners on site and see the school itself if that's possible.
Do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Costello, for allowing me in on this. I think the last time we were in on a virtual meeting about this with yourself and the Minister, it was made clear that you would go down and visit the school and visit the community. And I think that's imperative now, because you said yourself that there's a report expected before the end of the year. We're almost at the end of the year. It's the 1st of December today. There isn't a lot of time left to do this and to be sure that you can make some, to get some idea into your head and make some, hopefully, a promise to what you've said, that the future of special needs should be in community designated special needs schools. This is a model, an absolute model for a community-based special need facility, as has been said by the previous deputy, but also because of the engagement of the community, the parents and the families of the children. It's absolutely outstanding. You witnessed it yourself at the meetings, and I think it would be a big plus and an absolute necessity to try before the end of the year to go down and meet the parents and the kids and the community in respect of the ASD unit in Crumlin.
Thanks, Deputy Minister, for final reply.
Thank you very much, Deputies, for your contribution. And you're correct. I have met with a number of different groups in relation to ASD units and special classes, indeed, across Dublin in its totality. I know in Dublin 6W there are 4 SEN classes and there are 4 ASD classes. In Dublin 8 there are 8, and also 8 ASD classes. In Dublin 12 there are 17 SEN classes and 17 ASD classes. And you'll also be aware, Deputies, of the fact that I have triggered Section 37A, that legislation and that mechanism, of which on the 2nd of November we sent out the second notices in relation to compelling schools to open special classes where they have capacity to do so. And it's the view of the department that there are at least 25 schools that would be in a position to do so. But obviously it always goes without saying, and the NCSE, in fairness, have already opened 197 special new classes this year alone without having to use the particular legislation. So they always try to work with schools collaboratively.
Thanks, Minister. So